Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm Dr. Nerissa Bauer, your host. I'm a behavioral pediatrician and CEO of Let's Talk Kids Health. I'm the host of Let's Talk Kids Health Live, where I share information about behavioral health, parenting, and family wellness by interviewing guests to help me advance this mission so that we can all talk together. This is a special episode and hopefully the first of quarterly virtual roundtables I'll be hosting, where I bring multiple guests from different fields and from across the country. Tonight's topic is In It Together, Stories of Hope and Strategies for Mental Health Wellness. It could not have come at a more critical time given the events of yesterday in Uvalde, Texas. We cannot allow ourselves to go numb. Now is the time to talk about strategies for mental wellness for children and teens, families, pediatricians, first responders, educators, basically all of us. Our thoughts and prayers to those affected by this tragedy, but I am likely not alone tonight saying that we cannot let another day go by without taking action. Now, I want to save as much time for active discussion, so let's quickly introduce our panelists. I'll let them introduce themselves. While you are tuning in, please let us know you're here. Feel free to respond at any time by sharing a comment or question. We will make sure to answer any of those questions in the latter part of this episode. So without further ado, I'm going to start with Dr. Andy Garner.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having us, Nerissa. I am a primary care pediatrician outside of Cleveland, but I also have a background in neuroscience, and so I'm very interested in understanding childhood toxic stress and how we can use positive childhood experiences and relational health to buffer that.
Thank you for being here. Sarah.
Hi, my name is Sarah Rock. I'm a former child abuse and neglect attorney. I'm still an attorney, but no longer practicing, as I decided to focus on prevention efforts to prevent child maltreatment. So great to be here. Thanks, Nerissa.
Thank you. Dr. RJ.
Hi, RJ Gillespie. I'm a pediatrician in Portland, Oregon, and I do work in parental ACEs and positive childhood experiences and how those show up in parenting.
Great to have you. Dr. Amy Shriver.
Hi, I am a general pediatrician in Des Moines, Iowa, and I'm also on the Council of Early Childhood at the AAP. And in my state, I am the co-chair of the Mental Health Committee. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Dr. Rachel.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am a child abuse pediatrician by training and now also integrative medicine specialist and an advisor with the ACEs Aware Initiative in California.
I'm so glad to have you back. Dr. Gretchen.
Hi, I'm Gretchen Pianka. I'm a general pediatrician in Maine, and I founded a program called Resilience University, which helps families work through challenging times, and I'm sharing it with other pediatricians so that we have resources to give families when they are struggling. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for coming back. And of course, Kathleen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kathleen Hopson Davis. I'm a licensed social worker in the Cleveland, Ohio area, working for Courage to Caregivers, which supports caregivers of those with mental illness across North America. I'm also a family representative to the American Academy of Pediatrics Committee on Psychosocial Aspects of Child and Family Health. And my most valued job is being the parent to two beloved teens of mine. And I'm pleased to be here tonight representing the voice of families. Thanks.
I am. Yes, thank you so much. Many of you have been on the show previously. Thank you for coming back. And again, thank you all for being here tonight. So without further ado, I see that we have somebody watching. Yes, we have a great panel. Thanks for joining and commenting, Dr. Palmer. So what is the definition of ACEs? And I'm going to throw this question to Dr. Garner to answer this so that we can all be on the same page.
Sure. Well, traditionally the term adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, was referred to 10 categories of childhood adversity that were studied in the original ACE study. So that was a publication by Drs. Flitty and Anda over 20 years ago, back in 1998. And they looked at 10 categories. So they had 3 types of abuse: physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. 2 types of neglect: physical and emotional neglect, and 5 measures of household dysfunction: parental substance abuse, parental mental illness, intimate partner violence, an incarcerated family member, or separation or divorce. And so they came up with an ACE score. So you got a 1 point for each one of those different categories. And what they found was the higher your ACE score, the higher the risk for a wide array of poor outcomes down the line. Not only mental health issues like depression and suicide, but also smoking, substance abuse, cancer, heart disease, and even early death. And so the original ACE study really forced the medical community to start thinking about how early experiences might be biologically embedded and influence outcomes in health and education and economic productivity sort of decades down the line. But there are three really important caveats. I hate talking about the ACE study because everyone in their head's adding their ACE score and they're like, oh, I'm doomed, right? And so three important caveats. One is that it's not, ACE scores are not destiny, right? It is true that ACEs increase the probability of poor outcomes at the population level, but they're not as predictive at the individual level because there are other factors involved as well, in particular protective factors. The other thing is that there are other kinds of ACEs, right? So it's not just those 10. We know there are other types of adversity like exposure to racism and poverty and just social isolation. And so some experts have said, Dr. Ellis in particular has said that we should think about a pair of ACEs. There's adverse childhood experiences and adverse community experiences. And then the final caveat is that that's only half the equation, right? Because we know that positive childhood experiences with safe, stable, and nurturing relationships, they are also biologically embedded, and they increase the probability of positive outcomes in health, education, and economic productivity down the line.
Thank you for that. So any of you want to tell us, like, why should we care and why tonight should we be talking about this?
Well, I'll go first. So as I said, I'm a general pediatrician in Des Moines. And over the last, especially since March of 2021, almost every single person over the age of 11 that has walked into my office has had some concerns regarding their mental health. And they've been either just a very minor thing or it swung all the way to severe depression. Most of the teens, and I'm sure all of you have seen this, have what I like to call like the depression anxiety soup, kind of mixed all together. It's like a little bit of everything. And it took me by surprise. It was like a tidal wave coming over me of all of these kids who needed help. And we soon got very overwhelmed. We have huge, long wait lists for therapists. I had to do like a super cram of like making sure I knew how to take care of these kids in a way that really helped them. And so it was stressful for all of us, I think, on the front lines, worrying about everybody and helping everybody and trying to figure out what we're doing wrong and what we're doing right and what we need to do more of. So I'm sure you all feel the same.
Yeah, I mean, so as you know, the American Academy of Pediatrics declared a mental health emergency back in October of 2021. I mean, 7 months later, there are ongoing mental health concerns, just like you said, Dr. Shriver. As a behavioral pediatrician in my practice, I am seeing so much more anxiety, depression, attentional issues, but the severity has gone up as well. I'm having to call my colleagues, child psychiatrists, almost daily to talk through complex cases, just because it has been a tough, time for lots of people.
Nerissa, can I jump in? This is Sarah, probably the only doctor, maybe not on the panel. Kathleen, I don't know if you are, but I have a slightly different perspective since I don't see patients. I work a lot with kids in the community and with families, but I think one reason, I'm glad we're talking about ACEs and ACEs tonight, is in addition to thinking about root causes of situations like what happened in Texas yesterday and in the trauma of the pandemic, we need to be thinking about ACEs allow people to relate to that kind of trauma or those kinds of adversities in a way many people couldn't around child abuse. If we talked about it as child maltreatment, a lot of people marginalize that. So I used to run the state of California Office of Child Abuse Prevention, and that really was one of the major barriers, is that people didn't relate. So I think ACEs help us all relate to adversity, and we need everybody to be engaged in it to make a difference.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, ACEs isn't about those kids. ACEs is about all of us, right? And if there is a silver lining to the pandemic, and I don't think there really is, but if there's one glimmer, it's that I think it's gotten easier to talk about these issues, because in the past, you might walk into a room and say, hey, how's it going? And then immediately move on to keep complaining and get going. And now that's pretty tone deaf. You know what I mean? If you're not like, how, what's going on in school, how are your kids doing? How are you and the spouse doing? And that sort of thing, then you're really, you seem like you're living under a rock. So if anything, I think it's made it a little easier for us to talk about diversity and how we're feeling and how the context really matters.
Elena says ACEs is about all of us. So powerful. Yes, I think that's really resonated with the folks watching right now. So, I mean, I guess I'm going to just kind of make sure that everybody gets a chance to chime in about this. I mean, what do you see and how is it affecting your families, communities, and even yourself as a provider? Anybody want to take that?
Well, I think, my big interest in ACEs and in positive childhood experiences really has been from a prevention angle in terms of how do we get to the point where we can prevent ACEs from happening in the first place, right? And so for me, I ask parents about their ACEs, and most of the time when parents disclose a history of ACEs to me, it's a worry that's been in the back of their heads the entire time that they've been parenting. And they're so relieved to have somebody just pull that conversation out of the closet and just address it straight on. Most of the time, I think that parents kind of fall into whatever patterns they were raised in because that's what they know. That's what was modeled to them in terms of parenting. And so for me, the big point of having a conversation both about ACEs and about positive childhood experiences is that we can't prevent them if people don't know what we're actually talking about, what they are and what we're trying to prevent. And if we're trying to make positive childhood experiences happen, again, it helps just to know what those positive childhood experiences are, right? Like the literature actually lists out 7 very clear positive childhood experiences that if every kid has it, they have better outcomes, whether they have ACEs or not, both in terms of their physical and mental health. And so for me, just starting with a conversation about what those things are, 90% of it is just about education, saying, here are the things that we want you to have your child experience. How do we make that happen for you? And how can we help you to make that happen? So I think, again, a lot of it for me is just about starting from the point of just educating people about what ACEs and positive childhood experiences are so that we're able to prevent those ACEs from happening in the first place.
Go ahead.
Oh, no. Well, I was just going to jump in that, I could tell even a personal story and thinking about how protective factors and all the things that we talk about, supportive relationships and sleep actually happened for my family. So, when COVID first hit, my family were a bunch of introverts. And so at first we were great, like game nights, movie nights, we were thriving. But when school hit, it was hard. My youngest has dyslexia and auditory processing issues and ADHD. And so it was a struggle to keep them on the Zoom call while I'm doing my full-time work and on my own Zoom calls and getting texts from the teacher that, did I try another sticker chart? Which, so I have that parent perspective of, yep, I've tried sticker charts 5 times. That's not what it is. And then my oldest, had a lot of anxiety, honestly, about grandma dying, grandma getting COVID and dying, and that she would never get to see her again. And so we made this, my husband and I made this decision. We're going to drive to LA and we're just going to stay. We actually stayed with my mom for 6 weeks from Thanksgiving to New Year's. And it was game changing. I can't even tell you, there's just the supportive relationships of being with my mom and my sister and my brother, going out on walks with the dogs, getting out in nature, which was just around the block. I mean, it wasn't anything big. And then, we slept better. We just had that time. I can tell you both from a scientific perspective and a personal perspective, it lowered our cortisol and adrenaline levels and gave us just that space. And so it also just makes me so much more empathetic to all of us, right? Like all of us on this call, our parents, the kids, and that we know these things work, right? Like that we actually have strategies. And I can tell people they work for me. And so I can genuinely talk to people about how they can help others too.
That's really wonderful, Rachel. And, you know, connection is so important. I think time and again, Andy, RJ, everybody on the call has already talked about the importance of relationships and connecting. And so that's a great strategy. And thank you for sharing that story. Anybody else want to jump in before we continue to move on?
I'll comment. I just wanted to note that it has taken, unfortunately, a global pandemic to, with the majority experiencing what the marginalized have experienced on a routine basis for generations, to finally put mental health and the social determinants of health on the front burner. So, actually, a lot of, you know, those that were in marginalized communities, there is a level of gratitude that now their concerns that have been concerns for so long are finally in the spotlight. And, you know, now is the time to seize the momentum and really make an impact on improving the state of mental health, the mental health care, mental health parity, and addressing social determinants of health. And really, as a family member, you know, in the families I serve, we're seeing really the whole spectrum from, you know, the more severe, intense increase in anxiety, depression, obesity, substance use and abuse, suicidal ideation, but also the in between, the languishing, the not the feeling kind of numb, the just being done with it, wanting to brush this under the rug, but really not being able to, and so that whole, and having more conversations about it. That's another positive that has really come out of all of this, is that people are seeking help more freely and having more conversations about it. And we're actually putting more words to how people feel. Like there was an article that went viral early on in the pandemic about applying grief, the term grief, to what people were experiencing. And it went viral because people were like, yes, I finally have language for what I'm feeling. Same thing with, I think, with languishing, where a lot of people are now, and just that feeling of kind of, you know, maybe not struggling with a diagnosable mental illness per se, but not functioning at their highest capacity either. So again, talking more about it, having the language to do so, and seeking one another's support is so helpful.
Yeah, I was going to jump on that too. I mean, when RJ said something about these people are just almost asking it for someone to pull it out of them. I remember the quote from Fred Rogers that anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be manageable. And when we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. And I think that's what we're all talking about, right? And it's like, we're also like, does everyone else feel this too? You know? And so having that opportunity to talk about it and getting it out. And I think even Felitti in the original ACE study said that it's the isolation. It's this sense that if anyone knew what really happened to me, they wouldn't love me anymore. That's so damaging with the ACEs. And so I think you're right. I think just that is in some ways the intervention, is the relationship, is the connection. And I got you, I understand you, I see you. It's just therapeutic.
Yeah, and I would say too, I mean, that's true for parent to child, doctor to family, everybody that talking about it. I'm going to interrupt our kind of discussion here to ask this question from Elena. Thank you again for sending these in. What are the 7 factors that can buffer our children from the impact of ACEs? Dr. RJ, would you like to tackle that one?
Sure. So the 7 experiences that have been showing up in the literature really come from the Child and Adolescent Health Measurement Initiative. And there were questions that they put in their National Survey of Children's Health. And so some examples that they gave, being able to talk openly to a family member or as a family about feelings and feel heard, accepted, and supported. Believing that your family stood by you during difficult times. Feeling safe and protected by an adult in the home, feeling supported by friends, having a sense of belonging and connection with a larger group who has got your back somewhere in the community. So that's usually school, church, clubs, or neighborhoods. Having community traditions that you participate in, and then having a relationship with at least one non-parent adult who takes a genuine interest in you. Those were the 7 that were listed in the CAMI survey, and those are the ones that I ask about in my families. And just to keep harping on the relationship issue and the connection issue, I think when it comes to mental health, a lot of us were sort of floored by this CDC report that came out about a month ago, just talking about the state of adolescent mental health and how bad things are for teenagers. That I think it was 44% were suffering from poor mental health, a third were depressed, 20% were thinking about suicide, 9% had attempted suicide. And the one thing that was protective was connection. So those kids that had relationships outside the house, that were on sports teams, that were seeing their friends. And to me, that sort of developmentally made sense, that the one thing we're asking teenagers to do normally would be to separate a little bit from your family and start attaching to a peer group and attaching to people outside the house. And during the pandemic, we said, no, we're not going to let you do that, right? And so now the medicine really is getting out of the house. Go see your friends. Go join a sports team. Go have fun. That's what's making kids better. And so just that relationship piece, I think, is just echoing everywhere in the literature, that it's the connection, it's the relationship, it's the things that you do with other people that are going to make you mentally strong. And that's what we think we really have to promote, I think, as providers.
And Nerissa, I know we're all excited about this topic. We're all really to help people, but I want to go back to the protective factors and kind of clarify too. So the literature with evidence supports those 7, but I would encourage any family to kind of examine the strengths they have that may not be proven yet. And there's some studies going on right now where we're kind of scoping out how many are there, what makes a protective factor, right? But I think parents often have a great instinct for that. And RJ, I love how you talk to parents about like, what do you do? And because, parents have a toolbox, and sometimes they just need to remember that or have confidence in it to draw upon it at tough moments, right? So just throwing that out there.
Oh,
yeah,
Sarah,
I think that's really wise. It's the
beautiful.
same sort of caveat that we would say about the ACEs, that, here's the definition of ACEs, but it's broader than that. Yeah. And I think the same thing about positive childhood experiences. Here's the kind of loose, the scientific definition, but it is broader than that, just as you're saying.
And just like with ACEs, we're saying ACEs aren't just about those kids. Positive childhood experiences aren't just about those kids either, right? So more of Christina Bethel's data shows that in terms of family resilience and connection, if you look at kids that have had high adversity, but high family resilience and connection, more of those kids are flourishing than kids that have no adversity, but no family resilience and connection. So there's a parallel, like we were saying before, adversity is not just about those kids, and those positive experiences aren't just about those kids. All kids need those positive experiences, but particularly those that have experienced adversity.
And Dr. Garner, that is so empowering for me as a parent, and for me to message to the parents that I take care of, because it means that bad things will happen to you. We know that bad things happen to everyone. It's part of life, but it means we have more control over, how we feel about things and what we can do to help our children thrive. And I just was going through my Facebook, and this video popped up of my 2 girls who are now 11 and 14. But when they were littler, it was this video of my husband reading a book to them. And it was this book called Moo. Have you ever read it? Anybody read Moo? Moo has only one word in it, which is the word moo. It is an adventure of a cow who steals a car and drives his car all over the place. And this video just shows my daughters both like rolling in laughter, and my husband like doing the mooing, and they're doing the mooing. And it makes me like just shake with joy every time I see it. So I watch it every year just because joy. And so when we talk about these positive childhood experiences, the thing that I love is that they're not hard. They're not hard to do. Anybody can do them. I mean, one thing that I do, I come home from a long day of work, lots of patients, and I am a sponge. I absorb everything from all my patients. And so when I sit down and I have a family dinner, then after my family dinner, I ask my 11-year-old to come sit on my lap. I'm like, could you just do that? Because that fills me with like all the warm fuzzies. I just need it. And she loves knowing that I need her. And so that's not hard. That takes like 2 seconds. And so, even though there's so much hard out there in the world, and there's so much we're asked to do, and we're always asked to do more and more and more, doing those positive things isn't hard. It's just as easy as picking up a book or inviting someone to sit on your lap and just telling them how you feel about it.
I'm going to just throw, sorry.
I was just going to say, I have to say it also, having those conversations in practice is a lot of fun.
Yes.
Right? Like when we talk about ACEs, it's kind of tough and difficult. Talking about positive childhood experiences and how to build that, the families get excited. The providers are super engaged in having that conversation. It's actually really fun in practice to talk about.
It is. It is.
And Dr. Gillespie, I just wanted to point that out. Like, you are an expert in ACEs and PCEs. And so talking about it in your clinic is easy for you. But not all primary care doctors are good at it. And that was the thing I struggled with, is like, I know that this is an important topic to talk about. And if you are seeing someone for a well child visit, you literally have 15 minutes to talk about everything. So I was like, well, how can I effectively do this in a really easy and strengths-based way? And how can I teach others to do it as well? So one thing that I have done in my clinic is borrowed upon the wisdom of all of you in this room and some others, and I've made kind of it's based off of 5210, which is our healthy habits discussion, but this is called CC123, and this is talking about parenting during adversity and resilience. So the first C is like connections, right? You guys all know how good it feels. Like even just being in this room with all of you, I feel so connected. It's really like jazzing me up. And then coping, it gives you a 2-second chance to just discuss what parents need for coping. And I love asking parents, what do you need when you're stressed out? I did that yesterday. And one of the moms was like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, well, what about, like, would you like it if your child helped you in the house? Would that help you when you're stressed out? And she was like, yeah. Would you like it if you got some hugs from your child? She's like, yeah. I mean, sometimes people know, sometimes people have never had anyone ask them that. And of course, we know what children need for coping, especially during times like pandemics, is that they need routines, they need the positive rituals that you guys have all talked about that help make your life feel better and happier and more joyful. And then the 1, 2, 3 part is really simple. It's take one moment to stop and reflect on what your child is trying to communicate to you, whether it's via their words or via their actions or via their tantrums or whatever it is. Just like, what are they actually saying to you? Why are they doing that? Just be reflective upon them. Don't be reactive. And then the 2 is 2 eyes for seeing and 2 arms for holding. Like, we need to feel seen and acknowledged, and we need that attunement, and then we need the physical affection often. Not everyone, and I'm sure our child abuse experts in the room can tell you that some people don't really enjoy that, but those who do really need it, and it's okay to ask for that. And that goes for parents. I ask for it. And then 3, I ask the families to be reflective and say, what are 3 ways you can show your other loved one that you love them? What are 3 ways that you can do it? And sometimes if the kid's old enough, I'll ask them. And then I'll ask the parent, and then we just get into the conversation of like, how do we be there for each other during times of stress? And it's just an easy way for any pediatrician or family practice or whoever to acknowledge that life is full of stress, whether it's, super adverse, like, deaths and mental health illness and whatever, or just like the everyday stress that we experience. And that we can just use the CC123 to do that check-in, to see where everyone is. And it has been very well received because, as you said, people are very, very in tune to stress right now, and they do want to feel acknowledged and seen.
Amy, Dr. Shriver, thank you so much for sharing that. I was hoping you would share that tidbit. So what I did was I put it here as a ticker, but you can always watch the replay and rewatch how Dr. Shriver asked those questions. It's so important that you point that out, especially for the general pediatrician who are seeing a lot of patients in very quick visits. It's not that they don't care. It's just that there's so much to talk about. And I love this mnemonic. I'm going to kind of pitch it over to Dr. Gretchen, because I think this sort of made me think of the work that she's doing. And I want to give her the opportunity to kind of share some of her wisdom as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I love listening and being in this space with you guys. I think I would totally agree that the pandemic has made it so this is not just something that only a few people are dealing with. Like pretty much, I think we're all having the same experience, but everybody who comes into the office has either a mental health or a behavioral issue that they're worried about. something, and I think of it sort of, when I'm talking to families, I call it kind of like the COVID pressure cooker. Like we've all been kind of stuck in this space together. So even if your family seemed to be flowing really fluidly, when your son couldn't go to football practice or, your kid couldn't go to daycare, things got messy. And so before the pandemic started, I had kind of come up with this idea of helping families build more resilience through Resilience University. And I just basically see them for a session at a time, about a week or two apart, and help them work through problems and work through different issues, whatever's going on, kind of in little quality improvement cycles. So plan, do, study, act. So we come up with a plan, they try something, and we see them back later. How's that going? And so I was all ready to go when everybody got shut down. And I was like, okay. And so then suddenly my schedule was full of all of these families that were struggling. So I've really been spending a lot of time working on, what do we do when the connection's not happening? Like, what do we do when the kid comes home and says, Mom, I'm terrified something bad's going to happen to me at school. And the mom's like, nothing's going to happen. You're fine. Everything's fine, because Mom can't process it because Mom's stressed. So it's been really lovely. And I find myself spending a lot of time working on the two of those PCEs, the being able to talk about feelings with your family and feeling supported by your family when you're going through a hard time. So COVID is a perfect time for that. And I noticed too that a lot of times what gets in the way of talking about the feelings is not that there's not the love or the connection, but that one person's feelings, often the child, show up as behaviors, which then bring up big feelings for the parents. And then the parents are in their other space and they're like done. They just can't deal anymore. So they're frustrated. They're already dealing with extraordinary amounts of stress. So working on teaching parents coping skills and the kids coping skills, and we kind of do the same thing for everybody. We do mindfulness, meditation, just really simple, basic self-care skills. So when things aren't going well, pause for a second, take care of yourself, 5 big deep breaths. I do a toes to nose mindfulness thing where I have them start with their toes and go up their body to their head and just check in with your body and ground yourself in your body. And it can really help to just allow families to access those PCEs when things are hard.
Thank you for sharing that. And just for those of you who are tuning in, I'm going to put a little ticker at the bottom about Resilience University. Please go check out the website. I believe, Gretchen, you've done so much more since we had you on the show. Can you talk a little bit about what resources are on there for people?
So there's a lot of different resources. It's a work in progress still, but I have also been working with the Tufts, the HOPE network, which is the building blocks that came out of that study from the positive childhood experiences. So I'm using those to kind of structure what I call like kind of a first aid approach to toxic stress, so that families can think about, okay, like things are feeling really awful and stressful. And sometimes that's paralyzing for families and paralyzing for providers. So whether you're a family or a provider, if you just break it down into like, let's try to think of one thing we can do here to help lower and kind of inch your way from toxic stress to more tolerable stress. So what can we do? What's one thing we can do to help? So there's lots of resources there. There's videos, there's lots of coping skills, there's different strategies for parents, positive parenting strategies. They're just super simple, not very complicated, and just ways of managing your own big emotions as a parent so that you can be there for your child and honoring when you can't. And probably the biggest message that I give families, hopefully it comes through on my website too, but it's okay that you're not okay. It's okay things are messy. You're not alone. And especially again with the COVID and the pandemic, we're all in this together. So this is a perfect opportunity to talk about it.
I was thinking about what you said there, that it doesn't have to be perfect. I think that's the other. It's messy, and you don't have to be a perfect parent. And there's so much anxiety in parenting now for people of all kinds that they have to do it perfectly, and it'll cause all these consequences. And a little bit of protective factor, whatever that is, can go a long way. And I wanted to tag onto also Kathleen's comment about different families with different kinds of resources, because I think it's a really important point that those of us with lots of resources or adequate have been able to weather the challenges and traumatic events of COVID probably better than people without those resources, because we know resilience has a lot to do with the access that folks have to the resources they need, right? So the marginalized families of the folks who don't have a lot at the beginning of COVID, I think we all are very concerned about, even though we've been talking kind of generally, because the consequences I think they're facing could be generational, right? And back to your point, RJ, about transmitting ACEs, being very aware what these families have experienced, and trying to get aid and help to them would be a high priority, I think.
Yeah, I think I would second that idea that relational health isn't about being perfect, right? I would say it's actually much more about repair and growth than it is about being perfect or never acknowledging stress. I mean, you could actually argue that having some adversity is the way we build distress tolerance and we learn how to cope with adversity. And so I'm not saying we should have a stress to stress our kids. That's not my point. But the point is this idea that parents have to be perfect is really not helpful, particularly if everything's not okay. It's clearly not okay. We don't want to pretend like it's not okay. And then we're just gaslighting our kids. And so being okay with your emotions and being able to say that, if there's a breach, that's okay. Apologize and then generally try to improve, move on. Then we're modeling the behavior we want for our kids to acknowledge our faults, say I'm going to try better. And so I think we're learning more and more. The science is pointing us that way too, that it's not that you have to be perfect. And it's not that there's never a breach in the synchrony between the parent and the child. That's inevitable. The question is, are there other people around you can sync with? And when the breach happens, is the repair and is the growth? And I think that's really important to think about it that way. It's not about being perfect. It's about, I'm going to try better. You're going to try better. We're going to keep trying. We're going to keep growing because we're in it together.
And Andy, too, I would say, a lot of parents sometimes also think that if they don't say anything or just kind of try to act normal, that they can kind of protect their children from that. But kids pick up on that. It doesn't mean that if you're not talking about it, it doesn't mean that they don't sense something is amiss. So I think the take-home point here is, let's just be real, talk about it, and obviously adapt those conversations at a child-appropriate level. And I think a lot of us can kind of give some of our tips about that, but to acknowledge that and connect, because we're all in it together.
Yeah, Andy, I remember doing a training in a program called Promoting First Relationships about how I can do a better job supporting families. And the messaging that you were speaking about was called the good enough parent, right?
Yes.
We only need to really be like in sync with our kids about 30% of the time, according to my training. And when I say that aloud to families, they're like, oh, well, I'm at least 30%. That's good news. I think there's so much forgiveness of your own foibles, and that it's okay to have an adult tantrum or to and that there's value in the repair, and that it actually makes your child stronger and more understanding of relationships, that they're not always perfect, that relationships break down sometimes. And that if you do turn around and do that apologizing, then that parallel process will happen where they'll turn around and do that to other people. And so that it's almost more powerful to have that imperfect relationship. So I love the message of the good enough parent, because that resonates very loudly with me.
I just wanted to chime in as well. Sorry, Andy. That all of these protective factors that you're talking about, the sort of self-acceptance and the connection and the mindfulness, or that you're talking about between parent and child, or between primary care physician and child, is also work that we do, encourage the caregivers between parent and parent, from peer to peer. And that is so powerful as well. And it's something that every single one of us can do in our lives, that we can find our people, right? We can tell our story in a way that feels safe and protected to people that we trust. We can practice mindfulness. We can learn about it. We can be self-compassionate and accepting of our foibles, right? That we're not perfect. So, and also you mentioned about finding joys and recognizing your own strengths. That's another thing that we really focus on, and also important to resilience, and that we can do for one another. When one of us is low on hope, we can be a hope giver to someone else and recognize strengths in other people. We talk a lot about finding micro joys and micro moments. If you can't find like the big joys and big moments right now in your life, appreciating the micro joys and micro moments, the little things that get you jazzed up, the taste of the first sip of your coffee in the morning, the child sitting on your lap, those moments that all are important to our resilience, and that we can support one another in doing so. So I think it's also important to look at this not only as parent to child or physician to child, but also peer to peer.
Yes. And Kathleen, I watched your talk with Nerissa that talked about that peer-to-peer support. That resonated so loudly with me. I know teens, of course, really need that peer-to-peer support as they go through their social development and adolescence. I wanted to share the word that my colleagues and I, well, my specific colleague, my work wife, and I use when we are going through stressful times. So my main source of coping, besides that first sip of coffee, is to call my colleague who knows everything about me and understands all of the things, and to talk to her about the things. And that's a specific technique that we are very intentional about. It's called sliming. And so I have to actually check in with the person to make sure they are in a place where sliming would be okay, because we're not always okay, as you pointed out. You can't really be the good slimee unless you are ready to accept it. So I will often text her and say, I need to slime, is this a good time? And she'll either say yes, or like, call me in 20 or maybe tomorrow or whatever. But just the knowing that I have someone, the ability to just like get it all out, and really is therapeutic for me. So if you guys are sliming, just be intentional about it.
That is such an important message too. And that can be used just, if you want to talk, like sometimes we just want to get it out there, but it's so important to just, before you do that, be respectful and just make sure that the other person who cares about you is able to give you the 100% that they want to give you at that time. I just want to share this. Elena, thank you so much for putting in all these comments. Thank you for watching. So she says, I love that, being a hope giver. I mean, this is so wonderful. I find that even though we started with the focus on ACEs, being in this room with the people here, I knew it was going to turn into a message of hope and resiliency. And so that is what we need. That is what we need. So I'm going to turn it to really quickly. And again, if those of you watching, if you have other questions, comments, do not be shy. I'll be monitoring for those. But I do want to kind of turn it over now and kind of find out from everybody here. You've talked a lot about like everyday strategies that you can do as parents, for parents, for yourselves. But what else needs to still be done? What have you seen that's been done in the office level, community or state level that's unique, innovative, different, and that people just need to hear about? And I'm going to start off maybe with Sarah and Dr. Rachel first.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me. I feel like I've been talking too much, but so a lot of us, I think, were involved in early conversations when COVID started, saying this is what's going to happen if we don't do something. And by golly, a lot of that stuff didn't happen, right? So none of this mental health crisis was unexpected, and yet we're not fully prepared, obviously. So it's great to enlist and empower the force of all the healthcare providers to do that. I think that's a huge thing that is happening and is super valuable. I think the other thing is trying to scale interventions for people, because I'm not a clinician, so with that caveat, but I've worked a lot in the mental health space and worked a lot with community health workers and peers and community engagement. And it occurred to me that if we could empower CHW, community health workers and peers with more information about behavioral health, that could be a massive army to help support the consequences of the pandemic, which are kind of happening to everybody, right? The low-grade anxiety and depression, and because they not only could convey some things that are relevant and based in the evidence and recognize crises and make appropriate referrals, but often these folks are very connected to community. So they could be that piece to help people utilize their connections, their inner circles, like their convoy circles, or their neighborhood network circles for support. So I think that's something in California we've been very slow to allow Medicaid billing for community health workers, but we do now allow it for peers. So community health workers are coming, I believe, in California, for example, but most states have some form of this that we can use to help scale people with more knowledge than just the neighbor, which is also important, but may not rise to the level of an acute clinical intervention. So just that's one of my favorite ideas that I think hasn't been fully developed, but might be coming. I don't know what you guys think about that. But.
Well, and just to tag on to that, so we do, and a bunch of the people on this call, we have worked out a relational health educational tool. So happy to share that with people. And just, so also to your bigger question, Nerissa, of kind of what else needs to be done. A colleague of mine, Dr. George Slavich at UCLA Stress Lab, has said that stress is on everyone's mind, but in no one's medical chart. And I think about that a lot as providers, as patients, as people. We know just intuitively that stress physiologically disrupts our physical and mental health. But right now there seems to be a little bit of a chasm or like a black hole, right? If we see people with chronic headaches or stomach aches or pain, they're often told it's not medical, right? But we actually know that prolonged activation in the stress response can lead to disruptions in our neurologic, endocrine, metabolic, immune pathways, right? This includes pain pathways, reward pathways, chemical signals to our gut and our digestion system that could affect obesity, right? And heart disease and all these functional syndromes. And so the good news, though, right, is that we actually do have evidence-based and evidence-informed strategies that counter that stress response, that lower adrenaline and cortisol levels, that can actually help improve neurologic, endocrine, immune, metabolic function, right? And that one of the biggest is supportive relationships that we've talked about. And to be a little nerdy about it, right? We know inherently that supportive relationships are good, but there's actual studies that it lowers immune, CRP levels, it lowers your blood pressure, it lowers your BMI, right? It makes you live longer. But there's also these other strategies like sleep, right? We could help we know stress makes us not sleep well. So as providers, we can help people sleep better by giving them tools like journaling or mindfulness, or just even, medications, melatonin or prazosin for nightmares. There's things that we can do in all of these other ways around balanced nutrition and physical activity, getting that energy out, nature, getting people out in nature, spirituality, and making meaning of what's happening for everybody, and channeling that energy to a life purpose and a life goal. I feel like that's probably what all of us on this call are doing, right? And I have to believe that what we're doing is really making a difference, and that we're getting to a place beyond sick care and crisis care and reactive care. And just even thinking about that shooter, right? There had to be somewhere in the last 18 years of his life, times where we could have stepped in, where we could have given him that big hug. And I mean that in a broader supportive relationship way. And get him all these tools and strategies to prevent what happened. So I really see we're working that way. We're getting to this long-term multidisciplinary health promotion system, and we're going to do it. I'm putting it out there. I'm manifesting within the next 5 years. We're this group and everybody on this call, people are watching, we're going to do it. I really believe it.
So I want to piggyback on that because Dr. Giloff, I worked with the Center for Youth Wellness and did one of their pilot studies on ACEs screening in Iowa, and then went to ACEs Aware and did your modules, and they are life-changing. So if you guys are providers and you haven't done the California ACEs Aware modules, you should do them, because it does inform the way you can speak with your families, the way you can support almost every child that I have the chance to talk about. Those 7 domains of health that you were talking about, I always go over those, and I think about them on my own every day. Am I getting enough sleep? Am I getting good nutrition? Am I getting exercise? Am I doing some mental health moments for myself? How are my relationships? How's my mental health? Am I making sure that I get out in nature, even though in Iowa it is 50 degrees and raining every single day this week, so not good for my mental health. But just that is so important. And I also want to say that on the front lines, on kind of the individual level, one thing that needs to be done is that stigma that is still there around mental health. It's cultural sometimes. Sometimes it's just, the way we were raised. But I have so many times where a child is there, a teen is there. It's clear their PHQ-9 is through the roof. It's clear they need the whole gamut of everything. They need all of the ACEs aware tools. They need medicine, they need therapy, they need me to be there, they need their family to be there. And not everyone is on board. So one of the things that I talk about is a lot of my teenagers they like Marvel movies. And one of my favorite Marvel movies is Captain Marvel. You guys like that one? Mm-hmm. So spoilers for you who haven't seen it. There's a scene where she realizes that there's a chip that is implanted in her that has been holding her back from her awesomeness, like from her fully actualized self, right? And so when she finally figures out that there's a chip there, does she ignore it? Does she pretend it's not real? Does she hope that she can just suck it up and be stronger? No, she looks at that chip, she leans into it, she crushes it, and then she is fully actualized. So when I talk to families about mental health, I'm like, if there's anything holding you back from your fully actualized self, whatever that might be, it might be your financial health, could be your religious health, could be your emotional health, could be your physical health, whatever that chip is that's holding you back, you have to fully lean into it and do everything that you can. And that, so look at all of your options and do all of the things that you have the strength to do or the access to. And that's one way where I try to get everybody on board.
Great movie. I love this analogy. I'm going to share a couple other comments that were shared and then another question here, guys. From Katrina, peer supports within community is such an incredible asset for so many things. Thank you for watching and thanks for commenting. And then from Fozia Khan, parents who did not experience safe, nurturing relationships. Many of us know Dr. Khan. What can be offered to them in parenting their children? You all have mentioned tips, but how can we approach families with trauma-informed care?
I have a couple thoughts on that one, if that's okay.
Yes.
First thing, we ask parents along with, their trauma experiences, what were they most interested in getting in terms of support? And by and large, they ask for parenting classes and they ask for parent support groups, but they also ask for more information about trauma and what that can do. So I think that the first tip is ask the family what they want. Right? Mm-hmm. What is it that they think would be helpful that they need? Second tip, it's usually not mental health, right? They usually don't need a mental health provider. They usually need some supports and some scaffolding for their parenting skills. And so those are the things that we usually turn to in terms of what we offer them. I think the third thing, just to kind of pick apart at the question a little bit, there's going to be a difference between did not experience safe and nurturing relationships and do not experience safe and nurturing relationships. So I'm super interested in who's in their life now and who's supporting them now. And if you have that, that's great, right? So we go through this exercise with some of our families. It's about circles of support. And if you think about drawing a target, so you have an inner circle, a secondary circle, and a tertiary circle. In the inner circle are who are the people in your life that you can call at 2 a.m, no matter what, and they're going to have your back and they're going to answer your questions and they're there to support you. The second circle is, the people who you might know more casually that you kind of would ask them questions some other time during the week, like, hey, I'm having a rough time, can we go get coffee or whatever? And then the tertiary circle are the people who are meant to kind of put guardrails on your life, as I put it. So that's like your pediatrician and, maybe your priest or your religious leader or a mental health provider or people like that who are there to kind of, contain all of that. And so for the people that don't have anybody in their inner circle, that's the one that you worry about, right? Like the people that don't have any relationships now, in which case we do a process called a secondary circle push, where we just invite them to ask somebody in their second circle to come into their first circle. In all the times that my psychology colleagues have done this kind of thing, they've never had a person in a secondary circle say, no, I'm not going to do that for you. You know what I mean? That's not human nature. They're going to support you if you ask for it. But I think helping families to get the courage to ask for that support is really the kind of key thing. So again, to me, that's the sort of third thing is not so much did you have safe and nurturing relationships, it's do you have them now? And if not, then how do we sort of buffer that? And I think a lot of parent support groups will eventually form some of those sort of relationships if you're really stuck for finding somebody in their life. So that to me is first ask, then figure out what parenting supports you can give them, and then third, kind of figure out who's in their life right now that can kind of help support them through their parenting experience.
Can I add to, because this is first off, thank you, RJ. We have learned so much from working with you, and the concentric circles is so helpful. And I've had that conversation with so many people. I think there's an additional element of, if you grew up in a relationship that was scary, then relationships may feel scary, right? They may not feel safe. I may have trouble trusting other people. Actually getting close to somebody might raise my blood pressure. So a lot of times when we think of supportive relationships, we're thinking, oh, give somebody a hug, but that might actually really stress somebody out, right? Or touching their shoulder or any of those things. And Dr. Bruce Perry, if you ever want to watch some really great videos, I highly recommend his, and he talks about the intimacy barrier. And a couple things that he says, or one in particular that I thought was so useful, is parallel interactions. So for people who feel really stressed out in relationships, going on a walk, having conversations side by side, or, this is even just why we get so much information when we're driving the car with our kids, right? Because sometimes that eye-to-eye contact can be really stressful. And so, if you're finding as a parent that that's a struggle for you, then those are kind of techniques that you could do. And then also so I know there's a stigma with mental health, and we really need to break that down, because this is where mental health could be so helpful, right? Getting that parent the support they need to work through those safety issues and those trust issues, and really get their own personal time to work on those things, so that they could then be that better, more connected person with their kiddo, and so that when their kiddo freaks out, they don't then freak out too, because they've now gotten their work and their healing done.
And I didn't mean to imply that you don't refer to mental health, but that's not your first.
No,
unless the family's ready for it. If the mom is ready, by all means. But I think you always have to kind of assess where the family is, because if you just give them a list of mental health providers and that's not what they're looking for right now, it goes in the garbage, right?
Yeah, you got to meet them where they are.
And I was going to say that I'm always thinking about the parent who just is at the end of the rope, right? Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, emotionally, work stress, their kids are difficult, they don't have intimate partner help, whatever. And the reality of asking parents to do more in that state is just unrealistic and disrespectful, because they aren't in that place. So I think, and RJ, I think you've covered this in what you said, but helping them get to a place. I think, I can't remember who asked this question about what do you do with parents who haven't had that experience. They may not even know what it looks like. So being able to maybe have them identify somebody they admire, their comadre, their childcare worker, a neighbor who they think has it going on as a parent, and you as health providers can make recommendations for that. I think that's super powerful, because the trust might be there, the barriers will be broken down, and they might learn from the modeling in a safer way that is less threatening than a parenting class. And they're just not that effective. But that peer support, whatever official or unofficial, is super effective to help parents learn how to parent and feel okay about it.
Mm-hmm. Wow, what an awesome conversation. And I knew that this hour was going to fly by. So I do want to try to keep us, close to the hour, so that everybody can kind of think about all that has come up. But I do want to have this challenge to all of you watching. As you think about this episode, I want you to kind of sleep on it, share your thoughts on social media, use the following hashtags. #FindYour3, #PreventAces, and tag Let's Talk Kids Health. We will retweet that. We will reshare it. We need to get these messages and these thoughts out there. That's how we're going to start breaking down the mental health stigma. I would like to, in the last few minutes, start going around and asking the panelists just to share either a message of hope that can be shared on behalf of families and children, and or any last resources or things that you are just dying to share. Now's your chance. Dr. Garner, I'm going to start with you.
Oh boy, where to start with? So I mean, I want to put a plug in for the peer supervision thing. I love the slamming idea. I think, just about any other serving profession, there's reflective supervision that's mandatory, but it's not for physicians. And so I just wanted to say that that's a major thing. But the other thing I wanted to say quickly was someone mentioned Bruce Perry. I think a framework that works really well is his idea of regulate, then relate, then reason. And that's not only us as parents, but also what we want to do with kids and what we do with families. And so I think it really starts with that affect regulation, regulate first. Then we have that biobehavioral synchrony, we can get in connection. And then we're in that space where we can actually build skills, whether it's with the family or with the child. So I think that's another mantra of mine that I like to use a lot. Or Bruce Perry's, actually.
Thank
and RJ,
you.
because RJ uses it too. So,
Yes.
And it's in our curriculum, in that vital curriculum, because it's so good. And I want to give my time to somebody else, because I think I already shared some of my sort of tips about what I recommend. So.
No. You get one more. Go,
Okay,
Sarah, go.
Well, I guess the one thing would be, and speaking to folks as parents and as patients as parents, is just if you can just do one thing, the micro moment, the hug, do it and feel good about it, and you're on your way, right? And that may make all the difference. So it don't look at it like you have to be perfect or do it all or fix everything today. It's too much. I mean, none of us can. So that's my tip.
Great one. RJ.
Oh my God, so many. The one that just popped into my head is a study that I absolutely love, that toddlers that get 30 hugs a day have fewer tantrums, right? So put that out as a challenge for your parents, right? Because you're building that connection, that physical touch, that relational health, all the good things, just by, loving on your kids, right? That's not hard medicine. And I think those kind of tips and pointers, parents, I think oftentimes think parenting is really hard, but some of it is really basic, right? Hug your kid.
Yes, thank you for that. And this discussion today highlights that even though it's not hard, but it sometimes feels like this ideal of where we need to be, there's science behind it too, which is really awesome. So Dr. Shriver.
So I've learned so much from all of you today, and also from all of your modules that you have and your policy statements and your books and everything else. I enjoy creating ways to teach others about the same topic. And I actually work at Des Moines University, which is a medical school here. And I see the students and I watch them go through COVID. And let's just say medical school is pretty hard, but medical school during COVID, it really sucks. And so what I've noticed is, so I actually have a class that I teach, which is about newborns, which is everyone's favorite. Like, that's a great class. But we spend a lot of time just talking about relationships. And I do that like in homage to Dr. Garner, but also because the relationships that we create throughout our lives form who we are, and they help us focus on who we want to be, and they help us give back to others. And so when I talk to the students, I'm like, hey guys, do you know what the meaning of life is? Have you figured it out? It's all about relationships. It's relationships. The meaning of life is relationships. So my parting thing is, everybody goes through adversity. And I tell this to my medical students. I'm like, you guys are going through it right now. The acknowledgement of that is so meaningful. No one has told them that we know this. Like, they were like, oh my gosh, thank you for saying that. It's so true. You're right. Thank you for seeing me. I feel seen. And then just saying the most important message, which is, when you go through stress, when you go through adversity, just don't go through it alone. Okay. I know it's hard sometimes, but never go through stress alone. Just figure out, like, recognize that you're stressed, and then go find the somebodies that will help you through that stress.
Dr. Rachel.
This is so hard. First off, just thank you for, I feel honored to be part of this great group, and just so, lucky to be here. And I've learned so much from all of you. And I'm a little worried that whatever I say will actually be something that's one of yours, right, that I've learned from you guys. If I had some parting thoughts, it would be, just, there's so much science about ACEs and life experiences, being linked to increased risk for poor health outcomes. So the flip side, that I love what you said, Dr. Garner, in the very beginning, is that that means that positive experiences can help us heal. And so toxic stress, if we can really just start thinking of toxic stress as a preventable and treatable health condition. And so my high level ask for just the community listening is that we really study and dig into the intervention side now, and we really improve that science and help getting the right intervention to the right person, to heal their specific need, I think is the next way to go. So sort of that precision medicine approach. And then from a kind of just on the ground level time in, and I really feel like I might have gotten this from Dr. Garner, but maybe not. But I feel like that's so powerful. Put your phones down, don't do anything else, and really be an active listener. RJ, your radical acceptance, just be in that moment with that person. And we talk about it a lot for parents with kids, but it actually works with everybody. Like I should do that with my friend when I call them on the phone. I should do it with my mom when I call her. I love that one. And it's been transformative, even just for how my kids and all the great conversations that we've had once I started doing that and not thinking about my emails or work or something else.
Dr. Gretchen.
So I think my heart goes out to the stressed parents who have not necessarily experienced the kind of childhood they want to give to their kids. And so they're feeling the pressures of life, COVID, finances, gas prices going up, war in Ukraine, all these things happening, no infant formula on the shelf. And then their toddler starts screaming. And then they want to do something good, but they just in that moment are feeling like they're going to explode. So my little tip is for parents to just, when you notice the behavior, just try to be curious about what emotion is actually underneath that behavior. And that takes some sort of self-care strategy, because otherwise you're just going to yell and be like, quit it. Did you just hit your brother again? I can't believe you did that. And instead of doing that, just have them pause. Just if you can, just pause for a second. Take a big deep breath and say, whoa, how are you feeling? I noticed you just hit your brother. What's going on? Try to be curious instead of reacting in your habitual way. And that has been so liberating for parents to know that they have permission to not discipline every single moment, that you're not going to ruin them for life. They're not going to become an axe murderer because you didn't yell at them every time they hit somebody. You have time. It's not a parenting emergency. You can take time and you can talk about it later. So in the moment, breathe, be curious, lean in, try to validate that feeling in whatever way you can. I understand it's frustrating when he took your toy. Ugh. Yuck. Anybody would feel mad. You can't hit your brother, and then later talk about consequences if you need them. So separate the moment and the mess from talking about it later.
Oh, that was mine. Like, get curious, guys. I love it. Kathleen.
Hard to go last, but there's a lot out there to talk about. I would encourage people to be an advocate, to be a mental health advocate in their own way, and to seize the momentum of the emphasis that this pandemic has given to mental health, and really to whole health, to mental health parity, until we have prevention and promotion of mental health in pediatric offices, and that parents learn how to prevent and promote positive mental health, until we have access to as much mental health treatment as we do physical health treatment. We won't really have true mental health parity, and that includes payment systems as well, addressing payment systems and addressing it at high levels. But we all can play a role in that in a variety of different ways, by speaking our speak, by telling our stories, by supporting one another, by doing what you can do. And I think this is my last final message of hope, really, is that hope is actually a noun and a verb. And I love that it is a concept that tomorrow will be better than today, but it's also a verb, which is an action word, and it requires a plan and an activity. You have to do something. Wishful thinking is not going to make tomorrow better, but action will. And so if any of our listeners are feeling low on hope today, I want to remind you to be kind to yourself and remember that you've survived 100% of your hardest days so far. and encourage you to focus on what you can do. You can reach out to trusted family and friends and professionals to seek hope and borrow hope when you need it. You can give a space between a response, what your child may be doing, and your response, or I should say a stimulus in your response. You can breathe. You can create your own self-care plan for yourself and I encourage people to even write this down, to know people who are on your team, like the circles of support that we talked about earlier, and to have those numbers and names available to you, to find your people and carve out time for your health stress relievers, and finding those micro joys and micro moments, or the big joys and big moments as well.
I mean, how can I go after that? I mean, that was lovely, but I will just share my 2 cents. First of all, thank you all for coming tonight. This has been such a wonderful talk. Like I said to you before we went live, I just feel like the stars were aligned when I started inviting everybody, and everybody said yes. Oh my gosh. But all of us that went into pediatrics working and helping serve the families that we do, this just fills my cup, because I think we all went in with the idea of prevention, and I love how it's come full circle, that there are things, actionable steps that we each can all take, and it's okay to not be okay. We should get curious, and we should put that phone down. I know that sometimes parents feel really paralyzed, but at the end of the day, putting that phone down and just reaching for your child, and connecting with them. Take care of yourself, and remembering there's no such thing as a perfect parent. And just, give yourself grace. We're all giving each other a prescription of self-care. That's what we've got to do. And find your person you can slime with, right? And make sure you ask them permission first. Okay, I'm going to quickly share some of the comments from people, because I can't, this is just, I just feel like this is all lovely. So again, thank you to everybody who's been watching and posting. So Elena, I can relate to that experience. Connection used to be scary experience for me. Thank you for acknowledging that. Marianka, great conversation. I have a to-do list for things to follow up on. Awesome. Let us know. Use those hashtags, please. Elena, thanks so much for your generous wisdom. I feel seen, heard, supported, and I know the moms in my community will feel the same hope I feel right now. Thank you. Dr. Khan, thank you all for committing to this work and your support to families and communities. This has been wonderful. Katrina, thank you. This has been wonderful. Thank you for all your dedication and commitment to this work. I'm so sharing that. We all love baby hugs and dislike tantrums. And from Kat, I love the micro moments reminder. It's hard to be okay with not being perfect, but I think focusing on those positive small moments is so helpful. And that, oh gosh, there's so more. That is so key. I think just having hope that it is possible is the foundation to taking the first step. Katrina says, working with moms in incarceration and parents during the reintegration process with DHHS, there have been so many takeaways from this hour alone. Thank you again. Curiosity, love that. So important. If we cannot give it a voice, how will we know what we are dealing with at the moment? It also helps so much in modeling how to talk about our feelings. And I love that. Be a mental health advocate. Okay. I mean, if you love this, thank you so much. Share this episode. It's on, the replay is immediately available as soon as I end this broadcast. It's also on my YouTube channel. Share it widely. Let's keep talking. And as a reminder, please reach out to me. Contact me at Dr. Nerissa at letstalkkidshealth.org. Follow me on any of these platforms and message me if you have a topic or guest or you want to come on the show. Let me know. Let's chat, okay? And let's keep this discussion going. And so without further ado, I'm sorry we kept you a little past the 9 o'clock hour, but it was so good. I think you'll all agree. So thanks again, and we'll talk again soon.